Kabir's poetry is about inclusiveness. Mahindra Kabira brings to music lovers an unforgettable experience of listening to leading exponents of the classical Banaras Gharana and rich folk traditions of music on the legendary banks of the mighty river Ganges, along with sessions on art and literature, specially curated walks with famous local residents and delectable local cuisine. Sacred celebrates the spiritual through music and its ability to heal. International artists collaborate with world music exponents from India amongst the most incredible desert settings on the banks of the Pushkar Lake. Heritage walks, meditation, talks, and workshops are part of this weekend experience. Teamwork also promotes and recognizes the best of Indian theatre through the Mahindra Excellence in Theatre Awards. The Meta Week in Delhi is an enthralling showcase of the 10 best nominated plays shortlisted from numerous entries received from across the country and across languages. The Meta Lifetime Achievement Award has been presented to leading lights of India's theatre industry. For the young and the young at heart, the Ishara International Puppet Theatre Festival brings local and international performances to audiences across several Indian cities. While the Multi-City Kahani Festival features interactive storytelling sessions and workshops championing the power of imagination. Bollywood Love Story, a musical. Our international touring productions such as Bollywood Extravaganza and Flamenco India have sold out shows across Europe, Egypt, Russia and Spain. Expressions International Contemporary Dance Festival showcases Indian and international productions, bringing together several dance genres for Indian audiences. Teamwork Arts, celebrating the arts. For more information, visit www.teamworkarts.com. Teamwork Arts, bringing.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a very warm welcome to the 12th Z Jaipur Literature Festival. You make for a very august audience. And now for our first session at Bank of Baroda Betak, numbered 5 in your program sheets, the 6th string in the music room. Please join me in welcoming with a very warm Jaipur welcome, Namita Devidayal and Vidya Shah.
Namaskar, good morning. It's kind of exciting to be the first session at the Betak, which is such a lovely space and lends itself to, I think, intimate conversations on music, isn't it? And it's nice and warm also, which helps. Let's start with really what excited me about the idea of a book on this very exciting human being called Ustad Vilayat Khan. Namita, why would you want to write a book on someone who was so complex? Of course, a musical genius, but how did it happen?
So, I think after I wrote The Music Room, everyone just assumed that my next book would be on music, and it wasn't, as you know. But that did sort of, leave a certain mark, and I think people approached me to write a lot of different musical biographies. And somehow I just didn't feel inspired enough with anyone. With Vilayat Khan, I think what it was is that while growing up, I'd heard so many extraordinary stories about him from people who were close to him, who happened to be in my sort of general circle. And they were just so crazy. For example, he was this amazing ballroom dancer. He used to be able to unravel the engine of a Mercedes and put it back entirely on his own. And they were so sort of like contrary to anything you would expect from an Indian classical singer, Indian classical artist, that I was always very intrigued. So he'd sort of been in my general penumbra of memory and consciousness. And so when his younger son, Hidayat, pursued me for more than a year, saying, "Bhai, write about this man, because he's just something that nobody can even imagine. He's like a true rock star." I said, "Hey, why not?" And that's how it started. And within a month of doing research into his life, I was just smitten.
Fantastic. When you read the book and you try to get a sense of who this man was, this idea that you get completely consumed, engulfed by the man and his life. And I think something which some of you may know, and for those who don't, I think a central aspect of his life was how he was very persistent about his music. And also in the context of the other sitar legend. And so Namita starts her book literally with a bang, almost as if to say, this is Vilayat Khan Sahab. I would actually request you to, set the tone with that lovely little passage that you begin the book with.
So this is the first chapter in the book, and it's called, "Who is this Vilayat Khan?" 1952, Delhi. It had been 5 years since independence, and India was still in the mood for celebration. Two young string musicians were performing together at the Constitution Club grounds, a sitar player called Ravi Shankar and a sarod player whose name was Ali Akbar Khan. Both were in their early 30s and students of Baba Alauddin Khan, an ambidextrous musician with a goatee, famous for his genius and his temper. The concert was part of the Jhankar festival. There was tremendous anticipation around this particular performance. Accompanying them that evening were two tabla masters from Banaras, Kanthe Maharaj and his nephew Kishan. A covered stage had been constructed on the grounds. The musicians walked up, one behind the other, all wearing white. While they were tuning their instruments, a young man in a black kurta and rimless glasses suddenly appeared in front of the stage, clutching his sitar. He addressed the audience in beautiful Urdu. "This stage has so many gorgeous flowers. I would like to add my fragrance by joining my friends Robuda and Aluda this evening." A murmur of surprise went around the audience. The performance was meant to be a duet. Who was this? Although he spoke poetically, this man had the air of a human detonator. He held his instrument as if it were a weapon, pointing it at phantom enemies. His eyes blazed behind the glasses he wore. Some recognized him as Vilayat Hussain Khan, the son of Inayat Hussain Khan. A few people started cheering. Baba walked up to the stage and growled at all three. "Remember, you are all my children. Play with love and respect." It was a formidable stage. Ali Akbar sat in the center, looking vaguely daunted. On either side of him sat the two sitar players, both strikingly good-looking men with large foreheads, suggesting grand destinies. Two Meeraj Tanpuras at the back and two Chicago radio mics in front. It was a picture of perfect melodic symmetry. In the front row sat the undisputed heads of the music world and Delhi's wealthiest patrons. The men were dressed in stylish achkans or suits, the women in gorgeous Banarsi silk saris. They rustled, they coughed. The master of ceremonies introduced the musicians. Ravi Shankar made the customary gesture, asking for permission to begin. He then struck the notes of Rag Maj Khamaj. He played for a few minutes, then turned to Vilayat Khan, giving him the cue. The younger musician played the same riff, but in a more lilting style. They meandered through the alap for almost an hour, building gradually, thoughtfully, teasing the ma, the rag's dominant note, the maj in the kamaj. At some point, it became evident to the audience that a subtle musical duel was taking place. By the time the faster tans started, the notes had become sharp arrows shot with the intention to annihilate. Ali Akbar Khan hardly got to play, so after a while, he quietly put his sarod down and looked bewildered. His head turned from left to right and right to left as the sharpshooters on either side battled on. At one point, Ravi Shankar hit a set of high notes in the third octave. Like a kite catching its prey, Vilayat Khan scooped up the lid of his little metal oil box and, instead of using his fingers, pressed it on the strings of his instrument. The sound that emerged of amplified metal on metal was audacious and amazing. Suddenly, Hafiz Ali Khan got up from his seat and applauded. "Maar dala! He killed him!" Others sitting next to him cheered. Baba Alauddin Khan also jumped up and started shouting, "You have defamed my boys, Shoror Bocha, you son of a pig, you scoundrel!" followed by even choicer expletives in Bengali. The music stopped abruptly. 24-year-old Vilayat Khan was declared the winner in the Battle of the Sitars. He had clearly taken liberties with the music and even gone a little beyond the parameters of the rag, but he had created an impact. Ravi Shankar did not look pleased. This brash and brilliant musician, 7 years younger than him, had humiliated him in public. He quietly got up and left the stage. The epic concert was discussed by Delhi's music world for days afterwards. Who was this Vilayat Khan, the long-lost son of Inayat? The two musicians later promised each other they would never perform together. And Kishan Maharaj told somebody, "If these two eyes of India play together again, one will shut forever."
Wow. So this turbulence that was set off in 1952 at this historic Jhankar festival was continued to be a part of Khan Sahib's life pretty much. But before we come to that again, Namita, even as you were reading and as I read the book, there's a very screenplay-esque approach. I feel it's almost like as if it's lending itself to a film. I just want to understand, how did you approach? How did you decide how you should set the tone of the book itself?
It's interesting that you ask me this because I think it happened very unconsciously. It's not like I was thinking, oh, biopic ban jaye, though I hope it does happen. But it's really because I was trying to create a kind of a story that becomes compelling and visual and exciting to enter. Because I think that a lot of the writing that I've read about Indian classical musicians is a bit dry, and you can't sort of really get a feel for all the little things, the person behind the music, the context in which they were performing or playing, the whole background score that was taking place, the period. And I really wanted to create that. And my test factor was my son, who was at the time, I think about maybe 12 when I first started. And I would tell him stories and watch his responses and reactions. And, he'd laugh at some, he wouldn't really be responsive at others. And I think that became a kind of a way in which that I wanted to see the response of this young kid to the story of this man. And if he was interested, I knew that there was something right in the way I was telling the story. So I really, that informed a lot of the storytelling. And I just wanted to draw the reader in. So the color and the visuals and all that are part of that, Yeah,
but also speaking of storytelling itself, the world of Indian music is really strung together by anecdotes and what other people have to say about their own experiences of knowing an ustad or of having been in a mehfil where something dramatic happened. And so, how hard or how challenging, or was it not, for you to string together these various experiences? Because I would imagine that some of it, of course, came from the people who knew him closely and otherwise, who had listened to his music. And also there was something about Khan Sahab which everybody had this very intense idea about him. You know, it's almost like either they knew him or they would have something very, very passionate or intense or emotional to say about him. So he was also a man who drew that kind of a reaction or attention. So just stringing together stories, and how much of it is, I mean, did you also have to fictionalize or exaggerate or, you know, sort of interpret in your own way what you might have heard?
So I used a couple of devices because there's very little archived history that's sort of written that you can draw from when it comes to these kinds of artists, as you know. So what I would do is I would really go and find anyone who had anything to say about him, from obviously his family to students, which were people who were close to him, to even like his vet, his doctor, to somebody who may have attended a concert by him at some point. And through very, very, very subtle, stories and anecdotes, I tried to put the jigsaw puzzle together. While doing that, I also would always zoom out into the period. So I would read as much as I could about that time and what people might have worn, what people might have, what the sort of general aura was of, say, All India Radio, since I refer to that, for example, or the scene in Dehradun and Simla, or Bombay, the film industry. So these kind of like, zoom out into the larger context to create backdrop, for which I would read anything about that time, and then put it all together. And I was a little nervous about doing that because it is an imagined biography, but very much anchored in fact. So for example, if I read something that he had said in an interview, I would just place that in a conversation. So it was his words and his ideas, but it was put into a kind of a narrative style. And I was so nervous about doing this, so I sort of firstly put a disclaimer saying that, this is an imagined biography, anchored in fact, sort of like a jazz standard, where you sort of like build on a riff.
I mean, I can imagine why you were nervous, but I would like to know what.
Well, I'll tell you, I actually spoke with, somebody who's been a mentor for me, Ramachandra Guha, about this, and I said that, is it okay to do it? And he pointed me to a writer called Richard Holmes, who does this with very well-known figures, and I really use that as a template. I also read a lot of biographies, including Beethoven's, to get a sense of how to, juxtapose the man with the music. Because one has to keep doing that, and they're very connected. And especially in this person's case, because he was such a sort of rais in terms of the way he approached everything in life. So for him, even the way in which you, approached food and your clothes would be relevant to the way in which you approached music. Everything had to have a sort of a richness to it, a taste to it. He talked about how when you cook, even the point at which you put the namak into the salt into the food is important, and it affects the quality of the outcome. And I think that level of subtlety that he brought into every aspect of his living kind of is the way he approached his music.
Yeah, I think he was very passionate about everything.
Yes.
He was just,
I just found that amazing,
whether it was the embroidery that he was wearing,
Absolutely.
or the car that, of course, everybody knows about his passion for his cars. So clearly his life itself was like a drama.
I think so, and I think he had many personas. I'm told that he would sort of like be, one way when he was among close family, and then the minute he was on stage, he would actually practice the way in which he would walk onto stage, the way in which he spoke, his delivery, nothing was spontaneous. It was all very much, he really believed in the idea of presentation. So sometimes he would actually drive his family crazy because he'd insist on cutting his own kurta and finding the exact buttons that would work with it and putting it all together. But he was truly a connoisseur. And I feel like it sort of has changed the way I approach things. You know, I've really become conscious of aesthetic and not just said, you know, that, okay, this part of my life can be okay because it's behind closed doors and this part is like for he.
I'm curious about how he became like that, you know, because given that he had, I think one can say that it was a difficult childhood, you know, having lost a father who you looked up to as a guru who meant everything at that point at a young age of 9 or 10, and then having to struggle through your own musical journey and then shine at the end of it. So how do you think this, how do you think all this really came together? I mean, in your sort of experience of speaking to people who were family, actually.
I have wondered about that because it's, I think it's something that he was really born with, this imperative to go out there and extract, you know, because you can easily just fall apart and become this ordinary musician. And many of his relatives who would have had the same kind of upbringing and access to music did fall by the wayside. So what was it about Vilayat Khan? And I think it's just a kind of a God-given thing that draws you into a world of richness, and it's sort of something almost beyond yourself.
Right. I mean, definitely, you know, it's not very often that you have epoch makers in the world of classical music, so there must have been something exceptional about him.
Yeah, and then I always believe that when it comes to any great artist, there are so many unseen hidden factors and people who kind of like play a part in creating that person. And so, you know, they're often not mentioned. They're the sort of unsung heroes in that whole story. But in this case, there was his mamu, his mum's brother, who a man called Zinda Hassan Khan, who was you know, completely singular sort of musician, but
a singer,
really,
a vocalist as well.
he was a vocalist. And really quite unremarkable, somewhat eccentric. He used to be obsessed with cycling, you know, but he really saw to it that he would get his nephew to practice. His mother was like the original Tiger Mom before Amy Chua invented that term. And
I mean, really, Bashiran, I mean, what an incredible woman and what vision.
absolutely, it's incredible because not only did she see to it that he became what he was, and she may have a part of it. It may have been you know, that she recognized his talent and saw that he was the potential breadwinner of the family after her husband passed away. And it was also incredible how she sort of like partitioned the family assets, as it were, and had her youngest son play the surbahar and Vilayat Khan play the sitar, and saw to it that both of them got the talim that they deserved, to the extent that she you know, the story has it that she would actually get one of her nephews to come and teach Vilayat Khan, and she knew that he was a bit of an addict and had substance abuse issues, and she would feed that habit just so that he would keep coming back to her because she wanted his music. So it's kind of amazing how all these people came into the picture, you know.
And I think it's also incredible how she made sure that, you know, after all, he was from the Imdad Khani lineage.
Yes.
And, you know, it was one of the most seminal gharanas of sitar. And the fact that she realized that here is my son who has to take that baton forward and hold on to a legacy as well. And maybe, you know, therefore he should stick to playing the sitar and not veer towards vocal, which is also something that.
So the background to this is that he was being trained after he lost his father. He went to his maternal grandparents and maternal uncle to learn, and they were hereditary singers. And so he actually, at some point in his life, became a very good singer, and he started giving vocal performances. And at one point, his mother took him aside, bribed him with food, which is what she usually did, and said
mothers
that,
always do that.
Yeah, really. She was really something. I must learn a bit from her, but I think it may be a bit late. So she would make him have all this amazing khana, and then she sat him down and said, "You cannot sing in public again." And basically, the reason was that she wanted to keep the paternal legacy alive rather than ever be accused that he had gone on his mother's side and started just doing, qawwali singing, etc., which is what the mother's family was known to do. So it's really quite amazing and exquisite how she sort of built him up to be this sitar player and carry on the Imdad Khani Gharana, because it comes down many generations. And I think he was actually quite shattered at the time when she did this to him. So what he did was amazing. And this is where I feel like destiny plays such, interesting roles. So he decided that he would, I don't think he decided this, but I think what ended up happening is that the sitar, he made the sitar sing. And he created this whole new style of music where the sitar emulated the voice, and it had never been done before. So the sitar before that had been a much more sort of like strummy instrument, to use, very colloquial language. And he brought in those nuances that you can only get with breath. And it was amazing. So it was through this convoluted sort of like history of his father dying, his uncles, his vocalist uncle and grandfather teaching him, that we got a new sound in the sitar, as it were.
Right. But he's also an exceptional example of how life's experiences, just as you just said, life's experiences also define your approach to your musicality, define the emotion that you carry on stage, for example, when you're deeply engaging with all that talim that you and that riyaz that you bring onto the stage, it just transforms into something else. I think Vilayat Khan Sahab had that deep intensity about him. And what I find curious is that how it is juxtaposed with his being this absolutely social, gregarious sort of a person.
So one of my many takeaways from this book and from the journey of like researching him, which has been a 4 or 5 year long journey, really. So I was completely embedded, and what a privilege, really, was that he was an ustad when he was an ustad, as in on stage, but he was equally humble to be a student when it came to being a student. And it was like being a student, not just of music, but of life. So he would, if he found a really amazing biryani somewhere, he would go and learn from the chef what it was that made it so special. There's this lovely story which I might read out about how, even at the age of, I think he was 70 or something.
The Bhatyali.
Yeah,
please
the Bhatyali
do. It's
story.
really a lovely. And do you also have a clip that you might?
Yes.
Please.
We'll play that. So it's a story about how he had decided that there was this one piece of music that he just had to find because he had heard it when he was a young man. Okay, I'm going to read this rather than
to hold the mic a little closer.
Okay.
She should hold the mic a little closer, no?
Yeah?
Might be a little, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe.
Is this better? When he was about 70, Khan Sahib was on his annual winter excursion from Princeton to Calcutta. His loyal friend Jayantoda arrived at the airport to receive him in his familiar old ambassador. As they drove to his flat in Hastings, Vilayat Khan turned to his friend. Jayanto Babu, did you find him? I did, Jayantoda said, looking away and squirming at his own lie. For about a year, Vilayat Khan had been murmuring about a folk song in Rag Bhatyali that he had heard many years ago. He remembered the tune, but couldn't recall the words. All he remembered was that there was a boat, a river, and a supari tree, and that it was a beautiful and mournful piece. And whenever he spoke to Jayantoda on the phone from Princeton, he brought it up. Find me that song. At first, Jayantoda dismissed it as one of Khan Sahib's whimsies. But here he was, many months later, and it was the first thing he was asking for. He couldn't procrastinate anymore. When Vilayat Khan wanted something, he made sure he got it. He became obsessed. In the 1950s, he had been part of an Indian government-sponsored cultural delegation to Russia. In the Grand Bolshoi Theatre in Moscow, after the Russian sopranos' voices soared divinely, the young Vilayat Khan had started worrying about how the Indian performers could match this beauty. That was when one of the delegates, a Bengali folk singer called Nirmalendu Chaudhary, went on stage and sang the startlingly beautiful song that Khan Sahab was now haunted by. Like many magical memories that get eroded in the flow of life, the words of the song had gone. What remained was the emotion. Now, so many years later, he wanted that song. The folk singer had long since died, but his son, Utpalendu Chaudhary, was singing the same songs. Jayantoda managed to get in touch with him. He called him that very day and said that Vilayat Khan wanted to meet him. The surprised singer agreed to come across. The next day, Khan Sahib again asked about the Boatman Song. Did you find it? When is he coming? Tomorrow morning, to my house. Good. The folk singer arrived in the morning. Vilayat spoke to him about the cultural delegation to Moscow and the lovely time he'd had with his father. Then he got straight to the point. He brought up the boat and the trees and hummed the tune. Can you teach it to me? Utpalendu looked aghast. Sure, he mumbled. He got up. Utpalendu got up, said he would be back, and disappeared from the room. About 20 minutes later, there was no sign of him. A baffled Jayantoda went looking for him, wondering what could have happened. He was told by his staff that the visitor had run down the stairs, almost tripping on his dhoti, and slipped out of the main door. He later found out that Utpalendu was so daunted at the thought of teaching a song to such a great maestro that he had simply fled. But Khan Sahib was not deterred. He called Utpalendu and reassured him, and this time he went to the singer's house. By now, the folk singer had gathered himself. Vilayat Khan sat on the floor next to him. What are you doing, Khan Sahib? You can't sit there. Please sit on the couch. No, I am fine here. Today, I am the student and you are the teacher. Utpalendu smiled. He shut his eyes and sweetly sang the song for Vilayat Khan. Khan Sahib smiled as well as he wrote the words on a piece of paper in Urdu. About a month later, Vilayat Khan was performing at the Ramakrishna Mission outside Calcutta. He announced, I want you to hear this folk tune which I had heard Nirmalendu Chaudhary sing many, many years ago. It is an ode to all the boatmen who drift along the rivers of Bengal. He sang it beautifully, and the audience found themselves immersed in all the beauty and sadness of their land. Tarang, can we have the second piece played, please? It's the Bhatiyali Dhun. The one that's on the iPad. Thank you.
क्या बात है. इसके बाद मन नहीं करता है बात करने का. It's just so stunning, the music. So stunning, really beautiful. Thank you for sharing this one, actually.
No, and it's that humility with which he would be a, student. It's really something to learn from. I mean, we at this young age get all like...
But I can totally understand Utpalendu Das.
Yeah.
Absolute fear and, we don't have too much time, but one of the things that I did want to ask you was that, he was also part of a very complex web of, brothers and, this large family tree and the few that, his own brother, his
More complex
nephew,
were the sisters.
and the sisters, yes, and also his relationship with Amir Khan Saab and, all of that. There's a lot that's packed in here, but I would like to know, because I think you met Imrat Khan Saab, which I think it's so fortunate, really, if you can share that.
That was really one of the giant moments for me among many. So I was really kind of mortified at the thought of meeting Imrat Khan, but I knew I had to. And the reason I was scared was because they had a very terrible estrangement. Having said that, they were so close for so many years. Imrat Khan was about, I think, 7 or 8 or 9 years younger than him. Their ages are always a little ambivalent, and they used to lie about the years of birth and all that. But I had to meet Imrat Khan, and so I waited, and it was kind of strange because he was living in St. Louis, Missouri. He'd become a little reclusive, and nobody in the family talks to anyone. So it was really hard to find anyone, and one person would say, if you meet him, then don't come to me, and all that stuff. So I really had to go and do sort of detective work here and there, and I managed to find Imrat Khan. I got a number for him. I would call, and the person who'd answer the phone, the minute she found out why I was calling, she'd hang up on me. And this went on for a few months until I finally managed to locate a student of his and explain to him that I was really sincere in my efforts and I wanted to come and get his side of the story. It was important for me to do that. And so he kind of negotiated this for me. And I flew out to America and I went to St. Louis, Missouri, which is really the most unlikely place for an Indian classical surbahar player. And there I was, and I entered, and there was this adorable man sitting with a flannel shirt and a topi, and he just hugged me, and he was so kind and so lovely, and it was so beautiful because he shared so many stories with me, and he played for me this one beautiful duet, which is considered one of the most amazing pieces of instrumental music of all time, because it comes with a kind of a libretto which Vilayat Khan in his amazing imagination created. It's called A Night at the Taj, and it was a duet between Imrat Khan and Vilayat Khan. Even after they'd had their worst fight, they came together for HMV and produced this piece of music, which has a story about how Shah Jahan and Mumtaz souls come down on a full moon night, and he shows her the Taj Mahal for the first time. And they dance around it. And it ends with them being really sorrowful. And all this is in the music through the sitar and the surbahar, because they realize that it's almost morning and the party is over and they have to go back up. And anyway, so he played this for me, and he was crying in the middle of it, and he was telling me how his Bade Bhaiya was so beautiful, and all he wanted to do was echo him. And it was all just very emotional and a very big part of this book, because it's almost as if I've posthumously tried to bring the family back together. I don't know.
But it's also evident of the fact that, this world is so mysterious.
Yeah.
It is so mysterious, and there's really, the more you want to know it from the outside, the more intriguing it is, but it's also very hard to understand it, Speaking of, for example, for a lot of musicians, I think solitude is something that they seek out despite all the glamour and the attention and the adulation. And Vilayat Khan Sahab too went through many phases where, he's going away to Shimla or moving away to Princeton. All of these episodes in his life were really seeking some quiet, clearly. Yeah. And at some point he's also very spiritually drawn. Yeah. But I do would really like for you to share with the audience here, the Bhairavi story, which again is, it's just so delightful and delicate. Yeah. The fact that he shared a relationship with these rag that he felt so close to. I think that's a very special episode for me in the book, really.
So this passage comes right after I describe his various love affairs. The thing is, the enduring female presence in Vilayat Khan's life was not a human being, but a rag, Bhairavi. Everything else fell somewhere between respite and pleasure. It would be a momentary act, perhaps filled with passion, but with a finite quality to it. He couldn't do without women, of course. He played them with the same joy with which he strummed his instrument. But they could never replace his true love. Bhairavi was the one rag he played with heightened ecstasy, and perhaps the rag he played the most times in his life. Vilayat Khan was raised a Muslim and was rarely without his prayer beads. But his devotion to the goddess Parvati, embodied in Rag Bhairavi, was purer and more intense than any Hindu priest could have mustered. In his mind, the mythology of Bhairavi and the melodic manifestations of Bhairavi merged into one. Bhairavi was the counterpoint to Bhairav, the rag embodying Shiv. He once said in an interview, "I wish I could describe my vision of Bhairav's infinite form and awesome power. I would say the same for Bhairavi. How many different facets of her persona I have envisioned. O Allah, by how many different names and in how many different forms you manifest yourself to the seeker. It is we who give you different names, according to our limited capacity to understand you. All of them are names in praise of your glory. You are masculine. You are also feminine. You are the lover. You are also the beloved. You are the ascetic. You are also the emperor." Can we play Bhairavi, please, and end with that?
could see so many eyes closed while this music was playing. So beautiful, so utterly beautiful. Thank you very much, Namita. I really congratulate you for being such a fantastic chronicler of these beautiful stories. I was already quite a fan of the music room, and I would really, really suggest that please do give this a read, and before you know, you'll be reading it again. It's such a beautiful read. There's a lot of young people here. This is your way of discovering a rock star from the world of Indian classical music, really. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this beautiful session and for expressing your journey so beautifully. Namita and Vidya's books, Namita and Vidya will be available outside for signing copies of their books. Just exit left and our volunteers will help you get there. Thank you.